Welcome. You're here with me, Trevor Hartley, and I'm joined by Paul Nadeau and Brian Schroeder, some of our SummitTrek team. And what we're going to be doing today is we just want a brief introduction, just something about SummitTrek. I've been walking a road with you for a little while, and there are two key distinguishers amidst a lot of great things, but two things that really stand out to me is story and how we go about helping people move issues forward. So I want to start off with yourself, Brian, and I want to ask you this idea of every person, every leader, every business owner being invited into a grand narrative, the story that is out there that we can say yes to, is so key in the way we go about doing things at SummitTrek. Tell us a bit about why that is so important, and for those people who are going on these SummitTrek journeys, what the invitation is for them.
When you look at someone's life, someone's leadership, without the context of a broader narrative, you can lose so much insight from the journey they've lived from the first point to the last, and you can lose a lot of understanding about where that story heads in the future. And if we just take the gospel as an example, we have a people separated from their father, and then a father who desperately, across the history of humanity, up until Jesus, working to reconcile himself to them. And they learn from the journey, they overcome during the journey, and then a rescue occurs. And the rescue is sweeter because of the journey, because of the difficulty, because of the overcoming. And that rescue permissions, and the rescuing permission is that we get to have a restored understanding of who we are as men and women, a restored understanding of the role we're supposed to play in God's kingdom. And that role isn't do better. The role isn't sin less. The role is we get to take an appointed role, the sons and daughter of a king, literally, co-heirs of God's eternal kingdom. God's plan to tell the world about who his glory is, individually, particularly in each person in humanity. And something really delights me, the end of all things, the restoration of all things, the idea that God will not be fully known until 7.7 billion people all cumulatively represent the portion of God's glory that only they carry. So setting your life in the context of this broader, glorious restoration narrative gives it meaning and power and authority and a particularity to it.
Yes, and I remember one of the first sessions that I was in, just engaging on the SummitTrek journey, you positioned it that we don't know what your worldview is. At the very least, the gospel is the most epic story ever told.
Right.
At the very most, it's a story that will impact on eternity. So it's not just for people who carry a Christian worldview. Every person deep within them has something that resonates, that they want to be invited into a story that takes what is broken and restores it to beauty.
Most of us believe that our failure and difficulty is a disqualifier. And as redeemed by the gospel, it's actually to our further qualification. So the experiential currency of our life is the fact that we have overcome, experienced difficulty, and had it restored. That's a very different perspective than most of the world sees. And if we believe as we believe the gospel is written on their heart and they're created in the image of God, we don't have to offer this narrative, this grander, larger story as a definitive belief system. We can offer it as, if you don't have a worldview or you have a worldview that isn't as glorious as this, why would you choose this one? Of all the things you could choose, a story that says all your brokenness can be redeemed. Your life has immeasurable value beyond what you know. And the throughput of your life is to make better known in the world and to bring better and goodness to everyone around you. Why wouldn't you choose that? And what we found is when you encourage people in the direction of God's kingdom and their role in this larger narrative, they grab onto it with open arms, whether or not they see it as a belief system or gospel as we see it.
It's beautiful what you've said. We've got a number of different people that are going to be going on these SummitTrek journeys. Some may be big organizational leaders.
Sure.
Others are business entrepreneurs. Others are young professionals. How would you want to encourage them with this invitation of being a part of restoring something which is broken to beautiful through their vocation, through what it is that they are doing?
Our understanding of God's unique purpose in each one of us is that it transcends vocation. So calling is not what you do, it's how you do what you do. So the particularity of the glory that you carry of God transcends into every situation. So for a man who feels like his appointed role, his unique aspect of God's glory, is to restore leaders and organizations, to bring forward what's glorious and unique about them. That will happen in a coaching meeting. It'll happen in a work environment, and it'll happen with the young lady at the telephone store who's giving me a new model of my iPhone. Because that's how I'm wired and what I'm created to do. It transcends every circumstance. CEO, starting out employee, college student, that which is unique and glorious about you should overflow out of you in every situation.
I love that. Our calling is not what we do, it's how we do whatever we do.
Yeah.
So something that I've also loved about SummitTrek, Paul, is that you really give practical handles. And you're someone who has traveled extensively, dealt with world-class leaders in cities all around the globe, and yet you've got this passion for simplifying process and helping leaders move problems forward, solve problems, solve issues.
Yes.
Talk to us a bit about why that is so important.
It was fascinating throughout my life. Even early on, I got involved in problem solving. Started a career in the U.S. Air Force, and I got thrown into problem solving very early on, and I found I had a gift. God gave me this gift for looking at very complex problems and simplifying it. Again, and when you're operating in your gifting, you just think, well, everybody can do that. I didn't realize, no, this is truly a gift that God has given me, and I began to appreciate that gift more over time. And as I worked with military leaders and then leaders in industry, eventually I transitioned out of the Air Force into consulting with Deloitte, and I had these opportunities to just look at these complex problems all over the place. And at first, it was about the challenge of solving the problem and coming to solutions, and there was a lot of ego benefit to that, and there was a financial benefit to that. It was only later, though, I began to recognize this idea of restoration that we talk all about. Well, at its core, if you want restoration, that means that something's amiss. So getting clear about what is it that's amiss and why is it amiss, and then what can I do to bring it back together? I mean, those are the practical steps towards bringing restoration, whether it's in a marriage, it's in a family, it's a business problem, in almost all circumstances. This ability to frame a problem and solve a complex problem is at the core of restoration. And God gave me more wisdom about that over time, and as I got more involved in my spiritual life, and then I got more involved working with Brian and SummitTrek, I began to see the connection between restoration and problem solving. So I took this gifting that I'd been given, and I felt like God was giving me a different application for that particular gifting. And so part of this was, if we want to bring restoration, how do we help people see a problem and systematically go through a process of identifying the core issue of the problem? Because too often, in the heat of the moment or in the concern, when I would ask someone to define the problem, they would define something very here and now, very tangible and very close, but often not the core issue of the problem. So they would end up spending a lot of time playing whack-a-mole, trying to solve all these symptoms of the problem without getting to the core issue of the problem. So working with Brian and working through our SummitTrek methodology, we really started to refine this process of getting more and more clarity by asking probing questions to help people get clearer about what the actual problem is. And then the real key was to be able to form the problem into a question. Because the interesting thing about once you can get to define the problem in terms of a question, then you're able to ask for help. And so often, I often use the term, we spend too much time admiring problems instead of solving them, because you can look at all the symptoms and be frustrated, but too many people are unwilling to ask for help and try to get to this core issue and then say, please, could you help me with this? But that's the key, right? None of us have all the answers. None of us have all the skills and ability to solve every problem. But if we can formulate the question and get very clear, and then go a little bit deeper, not just to the issues or to the surface issues, but to the core issues, then we can begin solving real problems, and we no longer admire them. We actually solve them, and we move things forward. And again, I believe that's one of the keys to restoration, is to be able to, because oftentimes these are relationship problems. There's a variety of problems that through the solving of these things, again, identifying them, speaking them, asking for help, and then solving them, that is a key to restoration. So it's been a beautiful journey for me to see how some of this gifting and background I had can be applied in a context that can make a difference in so many different circumstances.
I remember one of the first occasions that I was exposed to this, and I had an opportunity to have a very real issue in the organization that I'm a part of being solved. And I remember just coming up with what that question is that I'm actually asking for help with started me on the journey to being able to solve it. But I know as a leader, so often we are caught with this little voice saying it's only a matter of time before someone realizes you don't have a clue what you're doing.
You feel like a fraud, right?
You feel like a fraud, and I had to overcome that. And it was quite a vulnerable moment where I was asking for input, and people were asking probing questions, and every question they asked, it was like, I hadn't thought of that. And in a moment where I could have felt diminished through the process, I came out feeling like, wow, that literally saved our organization 6 months of figuring things out ourselves in a half an hour moment of just this collaboration. If you had to encourage people that are going to be going through this process, people that are going to have a choice to either open up and ask for input around real issues or hold back, what would your encouragement to them be?
Yeah. Well, I encourage people to pray for humility. I mean, it takes a level of humility, especially when you're a very capable person, to be willing to be vulnerable enough to say, I don't have all the answers. This idea of feeling like a fraud, I think everyone deals with that at some level. And so having the humility to say, I don't have all the answers and I could really use some help, it's an unusual characteristic. And I think it's one of the reasons why we have so many of the problems in the world. There's so many people are unwilling to have the humility to say, I'm stuck and I don't need, or I need help. But if you can clarify the question, which is a big part, when people describe this, at the end I'll say, so what's the question? And as I help them formulate questions, I use it's just like exercising a muscle. So I encourage people to seek the humility to be willing to be vulnerable and ask the question, and then get good at formulating questions and asking for help. And it's often similar to, I work with teams, and sometimes leaders are afraid to bring really solid people around them because they feel threatened by having solid people. It's not unlike that. There's a similarity in terms of somehow by having these people around me, I'm going to be diminished. Well, sometimes by not having all the answers or being vulnerable, I'm going to be diminished.
Yes.
So if we can overcome those concerns and be willing to say, the organization will be better if I'm willing to be humble and to frame these things into questions and then ask for help. The ability to get things resolved and the ability to bring restoration to whatever the situation is goes up, many, many fold. So that's the art to this, and that's the encouragement I give people to, stretch that muscle and be humble.
One last question that I have for each of you. We're experiencing something of what I think is just God's heart to equip leaders with a new mindset, but also with a new skill set. What is it that you are just feeling in your spirits during this time? What is God doing? And I think it's presumptuous to think we can know exactly what God's doing, but sometimes we see figures coming out of the mist. And what would you say is an expectation in your heart of what God is doing with leaders?
We're at a really precious time for humanity. You've used the analogy of being in the final frame and having 3 balls to roll, and the multiplier effect of what happens in that final frame when you roll a strike. And it feels very much that way, that it's a very difficult time to be a human. It's a very difficult time to feel a sense of safety and a sense of well-being in the world. And if Jesus is true to his mission, that he came for 2 things, for healing and for freedom, for us to be restored to God's original intended purpose, and to operate with a sense of freedom that belies the chaos and uncertainty of the world. What a rescue that would be.
Wow.
And if we are in a day or a season or near a final day, the restoration of all things, the whole and holy of every human being, is precisely the culmination of all things. So what I feel like for some way in a world that's become a little bit dubious about religion, who has lost their respect or understanding of the pure message of Jesus, who have translated this glorious translation of God's kingdom and what he intended to something rule-driven, pedantic, and not inspiring and life-giving, that God has given us a window to offer a translation of his intention and heart. And a translation of what he intended when he intended men and women to be glory bearers in a way that translate into the bigger mission that he's doing. And ironically, because everyone works 8 to 12 hours a day, as someone said earlier, we're getting to do it in a context where people are almost caught off guard by it and so desperate for the rescue and ransom that even if it does have a sense of our faith in it, that they gladly receive it with open arms. So I think a crucial point in humanity, a desperate need for all mankind, and some strange, magical, anointed way that God has said, I'm going to give you a way in.
Yeah.
And that way in is going to land aggressively, catch people off guard, and bring about the work of restoration and transformation that I intend.
For yourself, Paul, what's stirring?
You know, it's interesting, when we started SummitTrek, it was a business, and we were focused on working with business leaders and using these tools and these insights that God's given us to change the world through business. And that hasn't changed. But what has changed, and what I've seen on this trip, is an appreciation for how God can use his church as the vehicle for bringing these tools into people's lives in a way that truly makes a difference and allows the church to live out its real purpose here. And at least in the U.S., so many churches miss that. They look at business people, again, we've talked about, they look at business people as checkbooks. They don't know how to engage with business people. And yet, business people have such the ability to influence so many. So for the idea for the church to come alongside and be relevant to these business people and help them change their businesses and all the lives that are affected, whether they're customers or employees, is an incredibly powerful tool. We've seen it here in real time in a way that frankly has challenged us because we haven't looked at it that way from our experience in Texas. And so coming here and seeing that lived out through this beautiful church and how it's engaging, it's given us an idea of the art of the possible. Not only can we continue and should we continue to work with churches like yours and perhaps others around the world, but also even challenging us to go back to Texas and think about, you know, how do we offer this gift to churches so that they can really live out the purpose that God intended for them with these tools that he's given us. And honestly, that has not been a focus of ours. And you and this team and this church have challenged us in new ways. So I'm going back with incredible encouragement and frankly, incredibly challenged. I'm not quite sure how that's going to translate. We're still processing all of this. But I can tell you one thing, we're going to be talking about it a whole bunch, and I believe the Holy Spirit is going to drive us in a new direction. I'm excited to see what form that takes. I don't know yet how that's going to operate, but I'm confident it's going to be different than it has been for the last 10 years.
Well, thank you so much. I think I wanted to take a moment and, in the absence, even the rest of the SummitTrek team, just to honor you. Thank you for firstly saying yes to Jesus. So often we don't realize the number of people that are on the other side of our obedience. And in your obedience, many have been blessed and many more will be blessed. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And we look forward to continuing to partner. I think if you're going to be starting a SummitTrek journey soon, allow your heart to be stirred, allow an expectation to arise, because this is a time. There is a purpose that God has you on planet Earth right now. He picked you for his team, and he's inviting us into this glorious story where we're going to not only be changing the mindset, but we're going to be developing a skill set. So thank you so much, and we look forward to you enjoying a wonderful SummitTrek journey.